Welcome to the next episode of the Leadership Lab. I'm absolutely delighted to be joined today by Professor Shearer West, Vice-Chancellor of Leeds University. Welcome.
Thank you, Susanna. It's great to be here.
Thank you. We talk a lot with our scholars about leadership being a journey, not a destination. Can you talk a little bit about where it all began for you?
Well, I think it was in my 20s. I was in a very small department at the University of Leicester, and it was an all-female department, interestingly, which I think had a really good positive effect on female role models for me. My head of department went on maternity leave, and I was only like 28, and I took over the department for a term. And I absolutely loved it. I mean, I felt like I could make things happen. I could improve situations. I worked very, very hard. But I just thought even at that time, I really loved being able to make a difference. And I felt like I could do that more in a leadership role than I was able to do as a sort of junior lecturer, which I was at the time. Now, that might not have been true, but that's how I felt.
Were you at all nervous about it? Did you think, gosh, I'm so young to be running there?
Do you know what? I think I was a bit a headlong reckless. I just thought, wow, this is going to be exciting. And I think that was helpful for me because I could have let the nerves take over. And I just thought, well, I've got an opportunity. I'm just going to go for it. And so, yes, I won't say I was not nervous at all, but I was more excited than nervous, let's put it that way.
Your background's in art history.
That's right.
Isn't it? Which
yes.
is quite unusual for vice-chancellors.
It's becoming more common.
Is it?
There are 3 art historians who are vice-chancellors in the UK, one of whom is at the Courtauld, of course. But yes, I think art historians, we have to, as I said, I was in a small department. I had to do everything. And you learn very young how to do a range of different roles and a range of different responsibilities. And I also think it's an excellent discipline because it has history. You have to work with art galleries, so you've got the industry, business or cultural industry engagement as well. So I think it gives you a great background for leadership.
Why do you think arts and humanities sometimes gets a bit of a bad rap, or is they're switched aside and underestimated in terms of its impact on the world?
That's a great question. I could do a whole dissertation on that one. Some of it is external factors. Some of it, I think, is our own fault in our disciplines. Yes, so the external factors are the sort of STEM bias, which you see all over the world. The idea that somehow arts and humanities are vanity degrees and STEM subjects are important and they're going to make a difference. So I think that's totally wrong. Because if you look at the world today, I mean, if you look at the fact we're in culture wars all over the world, who understands those better than people in the arts and humanities, for example? But I do feel that, I think that we as disciplines need to reach out to the world. We need to consider our impact a bit more. We need to consider that more positive side of our discipline. And I think we've become part of the culture wars problem. And I think that worries me a lot. So there's a real difference between scholarship and activism, I think. And I think sometimes that's blurred in some arts and humanities disciplines in some places, particularly in the West.
Why do you think that happens?
Well, I think it goes back to the 1970s, 1980s, when there was a very positive move to consider issues about race and gender and other issues that were not considered before that and needed proper historical, cultural, linguistic scrutiny. And I think somewhere along the line, that kind of line between the scholarship and the activism became very blurred. I'll probably get into trouble for saying this, but I genuinely worry that we are making the problem worse for ourselves.
Do you think that universities have the courage and the opportunity to undo that damage and stop the...
Yes, I mean, I think we do. I think that if we genuinely hold to academic freedom and freedom of speech, and we relearn how to have difficult debates respectfully. I think we do have to relearn that a bit. We've become very polarized. Social media's not helped. COVID didn't help. But I think that we are part of the answer to the world's problems. And so I genuinely feel optimistic that we can recreate that culture of debate that I think it's not been destroyed, but it's been damaged by what's been happening in the world over the last decade or so.
It's probably even more of a challenge, isn't it, for US universities
I agree.
At the moment?
No, I agree. And I really hope UK universities don't get to that completely polarized position where you're either in this camp or that camp, and there's no room. It's people shouting at each other across a fence, basically. It's the social media problem. I feel like the UK, I think it's got a very long history. It's got very deep culture. I think, to me, people are willing to debate, and I think we can build on that, I believe.
Is it an opportunity for UK universities maybe to recruit some incredible academics who previously might have gone to the US or might even be in the US right now, who might think, actually, we want to be in the UK now?
That has definitely occurred to me and many of my colleagues, that we look across the ocean to the brilliant researchers and teachers in US universities who are really in a really difficult situation now. And so not, obviously a terrible situation in some cases, but, we would welcome those wonderful scholars into our community. So I think that might be an opportunity for us, yes.
Fantastic. When you were at Nottingham previously, you were the first female Vice-Chancellor, weren't you?
I was.
Why do you think it took them so long?
Well, I was the seventh, so the history of the university didn't go back that far. I do know that when I started taking on leadership roles, bigger leadership roles, I used to go to Russell Group meetings before I became a Vice-Chancellor, and there was one woman Vice-Chancellor, which was Nancy Rothwell at Manchester. And now I think we're nearly 50-50. So I do think that women, I think all of the equality, diversity, and inclusion initiatives have helped. But I think, that women have been able to realize their potential. I also, though, think that I think women Vice-Chancellors, they get a very rough time, I think. Not saying
the time then.
I think men get a tough time as well. I won't say that they don't, but I think somehow it feels as if, particularly when you look at the media, or you look at sometimes members of staff, feel more comfortable attacking a woman Vice-Chancellor than they do a man. I've definitely experienced that. So I'm not saying men don't, because I have many male Vice-Chancellor friends who are also, they do have terrible time from time to time. But I do think that, and you have to be very resilient and not take it personally.
It must be hard.
It's very hard, really. It's very hard. When I started at Nottingham, just a few months after I started, was when there were big series of strikes over pensions that were happening all over the country. And I got personally attacked quite a bit. And I had to adjust to how that felt. And I do understand why a lot of women want to leave public life, like women MPs, for instance. They just get so much abuse, and they either have to be really, really tough and resilient and just learn how to deal with it, or they just think, you know what, I've had enough of this. Life is too short. So I think, the reactions are different depending on the women, of course.
Why do you think as a society we give women leaders a harder time than male leaders?
It's a really good question. I mean, it's I think it goes right down to the heart of how we're socialized and, how we're raised and what expectations in society actually are. But yes, I do feel that I feel people feel more comfortable attacking women, that for whatever reason. And I wish I knew the reason. I'm sure there's sociologists or psychologists who could tell me, but I'm not sure I know.
What advice would you give to young women who are passionate about a particular career, a particular sector, but maybe are fearful that if they get into those positions of power and influence, they won't be able to lead the way they want to because they'll be under so much scrutiny or attack for misperceptions?
That's a great question. I mean, I believe in authentic leadership, but back to the resilience point, I think one thing I really do lament when I see brilliant women behaving like stereotypical men in leadership roles, because I feel like they're doing that because they feel like they have to quite often. And I do think that we need to sort of hold on to our authenticity of leadership and whatever that may look like for anyone, rather than particular stereotypes of leadership. And I think the more that we can all do that, the more leaders will be, the diversity of leadership will be accepted, I think, rather than it just, being the stereotype, really.
Do you think programs like the Athena Swan Awards and so on help? Because obviously you did a fantastic job at Nottingham getting the Gold Award.
Well, thank you for that, Susanna. Yes, we were the first university in the UK to get gold as a university. I think it helps galvanise activity within the university to make change, because we also got a race equality charter at bronze as well. I think in itself, I mean, I would compare it in some ways to the research excellence framework. If you have a framework like that, it gives you a goal.
Yep.
And it gets people working towards that common goal. But I couldn't have done it without, I was pushing an open door when I went there. My colleagues all across the university were absolutely keen to improve women's career pathways, to bring women, to get more women professors, improve salaries, and also to close gaps with student attainment as well, both race gaps and gender gaps. So I was pushing at an open door, really, and we had a network right across the university who were absolutely behind this. One thing I would say about these charters, though, they can be very bureaucratic. They take a lot of work to put together, and I wish that there was a way to do it that put less of that time and energy into making an application and more into doing the actions. So,
yeah, that makes perfect sense. Talking about the race equality, as well. Again, you did so much good work on that, but across the UK system, I think only 1% of professors are Black.
It's a very small number, and particularly women are. I mean, Leeds has signed up to the 100 Women Black Professors program, which is a program to try to shift the dial on the pipeline and look at some of the barriers, remove those barriers, create more opportunities. And we have had 2 Black women professors promoted who were on that program. So, but that's, we're talking tiny numbers here, and shifting the dial is going to take a lot more than that. But I think programs like that, which are raising the profile, providing opportunities, coaching, mentorship, networking, are all great in helping to shift the dial. But it's just slow work.
How can we speed it up?
It's hard to say. I mean, one thing I did at Nottingham, which I'm very proud of, is I had a Vice-Chancellor mentoring program, which wasn't just me chatting with people. There was a full wraparound, there was psychometrics, there was coaching. People came and shadowed me at meetings, and I did it for people with protected characteristics. Mm-hmm. And I let people define what they felt protected characteristics were, but quite a number of my mentees were Black. And quite a number of them ended up going on to be promoted or get. And I just think it's not because of me or the program even. I mean, it's almost just providing the opportunities and letting people find their wings, and trying to remove the barriers, or recognizing what the barriers are, because there are barriers, and often they're unconscious, or they're not obvious sometimes.
DEI is obviously under scary attack in the US at the moment.
Yes.
Does that make you fearful for here?
Yes, it definitely does. I think it's a really complicated situation because it feels to me that it is a freedom of speech issue as much as anything else that's being attacked. And I feel like that we need to be very thoughtful about how we do our DEI programs so that what we're doing, as I said earlier on, is we're removing barriers, recognizing talent, making sure there's a level playing field for everybody. I think when it turns over into competitive victimhood or making people who are not part of certain groups feel guilty, or I think that's when it becomes toxic. And I think as much as possible, I think that as a positive enabler for us to succeed as a university. We're going to be a better university if we have a more diverse staff base, if everybody is given the opportunities to succeed. But I fear that what has happened around the Western world, and it's being taken advantage of by dictators everywhere, is that we've turned it into a guilt trip or a competitive victimhood, as I said earlier. And I just think we've got to stride that line very carefully, I think, so that we don't end up being where we are in America, which is basically going back to the Dark Ages as far as I can see.
Yeah, it's slightly terrifying.
It is, absolutely, completely.
We're talking, obviously, because we have Laidlaw Scholars.
Yes.
Yes. And it's 10 years.
Well, we're thrilled about it too. I know. Yes, it's a brilliant program.
Thank you. Well, over time, that program has obviously developed as we've seen different needs, I suppose, in terms of development and learning around what makes a good leader. And one of the components that we added just a few years ago is the international element, with the idea that if you see your own country and your own culture from literally a different place and a different perspective, you understand more about it and you understand how other people might not feel the same way as you do. You obviously grew up in the US.
Yes.
You've run now your second university in the UK. You've also done lots of international work with Hong Kong, Australia, Norway, all sorts of places. What has that global perspective given you, do you think? And how does it influence the way in which you lead?
I think that's a great question. I absolutely feel uniquely privileged to have been able to engage with so many countries in the world. Of course, in Nottingham, we had campuses in China and Malaysia as well. So I spent a lot of time in those two countries. One thing I would say is you learn that there's politics and geopolitics, and then there are the people in the country, and mostly people in most countries of the world are just going about their lives doing the best they can, and you learn about their different their different cultures and the different ways of doing things and languages and everything. But I feel really privileged, and I've learned a huge amount from colleagues across the world and students and alumni that I've met in all sorts of different countries of the world. There has been research done, which I'm sure you know about, that students who do have an international experience, get better jobs, are more open-minded, have happier lives. It actually is one of those elements of being a student that can totally change your life. And it did for me. I mean, I grew up in a small rural town in Virginia. I got a scholarship to go to St. Andrews in Scotland. I mean, it was like, people were asking me, "You're going to live in a castle and will you meet the Queen?" I mean, I was from a sort of place where this was just unheard of. Yeah. And if I hadn't got a scholarship, I wouldn't have been able to do it. And it made such a difference to my life. It completely changed the way I thought about everything. So,
besides the fact that you presumably didn't meet the Queen, or you never...
I have met the Queen once, really? But not when I was a student.
What would surprise your old school friends the most about what it's like living in the UK versus... I know the US is hard because Virginia is so different from, say,
Exactly. Well, especially the
or-
part of Virginia I'm from. I'm from a really, really rural area. I just think that the cultural richness of life in the UK, there wasn't any. I mean, that was one reason I wanted to move on and expand my horizons. I mean, culture was the cinema that was 25 miles from the house and occasional, bands that came to the high school to play. I mean, it was just, or the radio, you could listen to radio, watch TV. And I think here it's just, you're just surrounded by all kinds of culture all the time. And I think that people would find that unusual. But it was one reason I hankered to go to another country. I read a lot when I was little, and I just thought Europe sounded wonderful. It just sounded like paradise to me, really. Yeah.
I've been interviewing lots of VCs, which is obviously an enormous privilege, and everybody brings their own perspectives and the challenges they're facing. But Hugh Brady at Imperial said to me that a challenge that all UK universities are facing is the financial model, and that it's basically broken in the UK. Does that resonate with you?
I agree entirely with Hugh on that. I just think there's no way of arguing any other way. We've had more or less flat tuition fees for a decade. The government has recently raised them a little bit, but we've also been hit with the extra national insurance contributions. And we've had to rely more and more on overseas students to, support, and that we love having overseas. Needless to say, our international students are fantastic, and we're so glad we have a global community here at Leeds. But it's become an issue where even teaching undergraduates, doing research which doesn't pay for itself, everything that we do as a university is dependent upon that. So a single point of failure model, basically. I don't see an easy solution to it. The government has a lot of problems on its desk, and I can see why we're not the number one thing they're worried about right now. So we have to do everything we can for ourselves, but I think it just means as a sector we're going to have to learn to do more with less for quite some time to come. And at some point, some brave government's going to have to look at major structural change to how the sector is financed, because I just don't think it could go on like this.
Because you can't increase fees either, can you? Because as students, that's impossible.
No, our home tuition fees are capped because they come through the student loan company. For totally understandable reasons. The student loan company the government needs to keep, the repayment of fees coming back in. So I understand how we've got into this position. But it would have been, I think, very helpful if tuition fees had been index linked 10 years ago, because I think it would have actually allowed us to keep a bit more steady state. And we're kind of, as soon as we have geopolitical issues and international students, for whatever reason, come in fewer numbers, the whole of the university sector is challenged financially. I think 70% of universities are looking at a deficit potentially in the next year.
So despite that, though, you've committed to, I think, 174 million?
Yes, we have. We have.
How do you square that circle?
Well, we are one of our brilliant areas of research in Leeds is anything to do with environmental science and climate change. And we have to live our values on that one. And we do use internal expertise a lot through this. I do think that we need to keep under review what we're doing and what are the kind of the ways we're spending that money, to make sure that it's being done in a way that genuinely contributes to our carbon neutrality and doesn't and isn't value for money, basically. But I think we're doing well on that. We're keeping it under constant review. We are committed to doing that. But we are in financial challenges at the moment, so we just need to make sure we're spending the money in the best possible way.
The US model obviously relies on donors for a lot of their funding. Pros and cons to that model?
Well, the pros are that it's great to have fabulous philanthropists who are willing to give back, whether they're alumni or just very generous people. And a lot of it helps students, so a lot of it goes to scholarships. A lot of it supports major research, particularly in health areas, for example. So things that we might not be able to do ourselves are enabled by that wonderful philanthropy. I do think, again, just like we're overly reliant on international students in the UK, if a university becomes overly reliant on philanthropy, it's volatile and subject, to peaks and troughs, and it isn't steady. You can't rely on it, and so, and I do think that it's great to have donors coming in with ideas and things that you might not have thought of yourself, but if it comes to a point where there's interference in the way a university is run, I'm not saying that happens, doesn't happen here, but if it does happen, that's really not good.
Do you think it might have contributed to some of the tension on US campuses?
Well, I don't think it's just me saying that. I think if you read the New York Times or US newspapers, it definitely has done, because particular donors have been very vocal in their commentary about what various administrations in the U.S. have done, particularly about the Palestine-Israeli conflict. So, I think it becomes politicized in a way that's not very healthy.
Leeds has just gone up 6 places in the Yale ranking.
It has. We're very excited about that.
How are you going to build on that, bring up momentum?
Well, I mean, one thing I would say is that rankings are not an objective measure of quality, but they're perceived to be an objective measure of quality. But there are underlying metrics in them that are really important to us around, research citation, student satisfaction, international staff and students. They're things that we want to do and that we want to be good at. I think the challenge going forward to keep our ranking where it is for us to really focus on quality and impact. So we need to think about if we have areas in the university where the quality is not what we'd want it to be, whether that's in terms of research or education. I think we have to be very strong in addressing those issues. But I think we would want to do that anyway, regardless of league tables. And the benefit does come when the league tables recognize that those changes that we've made.
And when you talk about quality, what are the sort of elements of that you might be focused on?
Well, as I said, research citations, that's a big one. Research grant income and is another one. Student satisfaction results. Staff survey results, even though league tables don't necessarily recognize those. The mix of international staff we have, that's something that we would like to have. We're globally leading a university, and we want a very diverse global staff base. And so those are some of the things that we would be looking at.
One of the things that we've been advocating for is for UK universities to have as part of their rankings the way in which they develop character. In the same way that Wall Street Journal has just introduced it in the US. It's still tiny, it's 4%, the total mark. But we do think it's important. And obviously, character development through the Oxford Character Project is part of the Laidlaw Scholar experience. And our idea is we're working with the top universities in the world. The students at those universities are very likely to be the ones who reach positions of power and influence. And when they get there and their integrity is tested, because inevitably it will be, of course, that they have that moral muscle. And yet when you look around the world right now, arguably the people who are in positions of power don't demonstrate that responsible leadership, that it has deeply embedded within it a belief in morality and humanity. So Where do you think we are on that? Have we lost the argument? Or what can we do to say, actually, the most effective leaders in terms of impact are those that also are kind and decent and care about people and places?
I don't think I say I'm an optimist. I don't think we've lost the argument, but I think we have to keep making the argument. And you're absolutely right. I mean, the UK is responsible for a lot of the world leaders. I mean, I think we're second after the US in educating people who are in major leadership positions around the world. And being in that position gives us an opportunity. So I think what the Laidlaw Scholar Program is doing in this is absolutely right, that we have to make sure that values are embedded in the way we operate as a university. So at Leeds, we have values in our strategy: compassion, collaboration, integrity, and inclusion. And we are working on frameworks of how do we live those values? When are we not living those values? And this isn't just, it starts with thinking about how the staff operate within those values, but the students as well. And I think having open conversations about this, making sure people are thinking all the time about how their behavior is affecting others, when they're not. And because we all do it. There are always times when we all behave in a way that doesn't align with our values, because we're human.
Yeah.
But just to be very upfront and open in these conversations, I think is really important. And that's something that we're definitely pushing at the university as part of our strategic plan.
What other values do you think are important for leaders? So if you all of the different leaders you've met around the world and you think about the leadership traits that really seem to cut through and make a difference, what would you say they are?
I think empathy is a big one. And that often is talked about as a soft quality, but it's not. Because if you're a leader and you're empathetic, you still have to do things that are going to have a negative impact on some people, for the greater good. And so you have to, you will feel that. But on the other hand, if you don't feel that, there's some leaders around the world, I'm not going to be political and name them, that I don't see any sign of empathy in their leadership. And people admire that because it's strong leadership, supposedly. But I think being empathetic is actually quite strong. So I think that's important. I do think you have to be very courageous.
Yeah.
And willing to do things that are not going to be popular for the right reasons. And I've already mentioned resilience. I mean, I think you can't be a leader in today's world without a lot of resilience, because it's a tough world, really. I feel for the younger generations of our students coming through, having to face what is really, really difficult environment.
Holding that bravery and that empathy in sort of tension is probably one of the more challenging things to do, isn't it? Because it's quite easy to be brave and break things.
Yes, that's right.
You don't care about the people who get hurt. And
that is absolutely right. And I think that's why I say empathy isn't a soft skill as far as I'm concerned. Because if you've really thought about it, and you still think, the absolute right thing to do is this. I've looked at all the evidence. I know how the people are going to feel about it. And you have to be courageous then to carry through on that and just carry the emotion, the empathetic emotions with you. But it allows you to be more authentic, to talk to your colleagues and your staff in a way that they can recognize and appreciate. And I think that's quite important as well.
One of the other things that we're working on as a foundation is changing the language around those skills, because as long as people talk about it as a soft skill,
I agree. Yeah.
it doesn't seem to have the same importance. And
I
yet,
agree.
To your point, it's actually integral to being a good leader.
I totally agree with you, and I do get very annoyed about that. That's why I sort of did the scare quotes around soft skills, because I don't think they are soft skills. I think actually in some ways it's easier to be a tyrant
I think it's much easier.
it's just
If you don't care about
exactly
people, or you don't have self-doubt when it comes to
yes, that's true.
anything, the humility is much more, I suppose, scary to deal with.
Yes.
And just headlong, we're going to go this direction and whatever.
Yes, well, I mean, one of my vice-chancellor colleagues said to me it's a man actually, that he worries about anyone who doesn't occasionally have imposter syndrome, because actually it seems a human quality that, the idea that you feel that you can do anything anywhere all the time is a slightly terrifying concept.
Well, in the Oxford Character Project training, we talk a lot about an excess of a virtue and an excess of bravery.
Yes, that's
probably leads to terrible consequences.
That's true.
Because you're not seeing all of the potential consequences. And I suppose in the same way, the opposite is true. Say if you don't have enough bravery, then you can become almost paralyzed by fear and do nothing.
Exactly.
So either extreme is not helpful.
No, and I agree. I think that's a really nice way to put it, actually. I agree with that.
Yeah. I mentioned Hugh Brady earlier, and we have a tradition on these conversations that the last guest asks the next guest a question. So he rather cheekily actually has two. But his first one is, if you could go back to your younger self and change the university course that you took, would there have been a different route for you?
I doubt I would have done anything different, because I actually went to university to study English. I moved into art history, so I changed. But the students have asked me in their radio program, they asked me the same question, and I thought about it, and I think I would have loved to have done international relations, but also with maths or some kind of statistics, because I loved maths when I was in school. I'm not a kind of theoretical mathematician, but the kind of practical maths, but I was always towards the humanities side. So I think, if I were courageous and went back, I would do a joint degree in those two subjects. And I actually looked it up and found that you can do it in some universities, including St. Andrews, where I did my PhD.
Oh,
so there you go.
You can always do that next. Okay.
Well, it's a retirement thing, I think. Yeah.
His other question was around the university and what's the single biggest topic that the university could focus on that will really make a difference in the world?
Well, I think we're already doing it at Leeds. And I did mention earlier our environmental sustainability research right across the board is absolutely outstanding. And we all know that, well, not everybody knows, but we know that there is, an environmental crisis. And so everything that we can do to help ameliorate, mitigate some of those natural disaster problems around the world, I think is something I think we're already doing.
And do students themselves all have climate in their courses in some of the ways that other universities are?
We're working towards that.
Yeah.
We're working towards a sustainability pathway through the courses. I mean, we have so many courses at Leeds that we don't have it in all of them now, but there's a acute awareness that this is something that we need to embed in our student experience.
Your turn. What would you like to ask the next interviewee?
I would like to ask them how, whatever their organization is, how they know or get a sense of how the grassroots are feeling when they're making big strategic change or when they're doing something difficult. So what methods do they use to understand what's happening on the ground?
And is that with all stakeholder groups, with students?
Yeah, with everything. If it's a vice-chancellor, it's with, yes, but just the people that they will, we're a massive organization, and people that they don't see every day, how do they get a sense of how they're feeling and what changes might mean for them? I hope that question is challenging enough for somebody.
I'm sure it will be, whether it's a politician or a vice-chancellor.
Yes.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks, Suzanne. It's been a great conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.